A host of developments here in this part of the world made international headlines as well, ranging from President Yoon Suk-yeol's calls for a shift in stance in Seoul's Unification Ministry to conflict over the location of this year's Queer Culture Festival in Seoul and Korea's shrinking population. So what shift in stance has the president called for? Why was there a location change for this year's Queer Culture Festival in Seoul? And is there an adequate solution to Korea's shrinking population? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. It's that time of the week yet again during which we touch upon some of the stories here that made headlines elsewhere as well. And for this, I have Andres Sanchez Braun here in the studio with me. Andres, welcome back.
Thanks for having us here as always.
I also have Malene Jensen with us. Malene, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you. It's nice being here.
Right, Andres, so like I mentioned at the start in the clip, having tapped a new Unification Minister, President Yoon Suk-yeol has called for a tough stance on North Korea from the Unification Ministry. First of all, what exactly did he say, and how does that stance look to affect future cross-border ties, do you think?
Well, as you mentioned, President Yoon Suk-yeol tapped Professor Kim Yong-ho to take over Kwon Yong-se as the new Minister of Unification. The Ministry of Unification is the one in charge of ties with the North. And then I think I mean, we should talk about Professor Kim's background here. He is considered, compared to Kwon, more of a conservative. He's a professor of political science and diplomacy in Songshin's Women's University. And, you know, he's a person who's a well-known advocate of respecting human rights in North Korea and someone who has said that ties between both Koreas won't be genuinely good until Kim Jong-un's regime is toppled. So that said, and pending an endorsement from the National Assembly, because they have to do a hearing still, President Yoon Suk-yeol, right after tapping Professor Kim, said that the Ministry of Unification up to this point had acted a little bit like the North Korean Ministry of Aid, and that was wrong. And he said that, you know, the Ministry of Unification should bring a better and more human life to both South and North Koreans, saying, like, you know, it should put principles like respecting human rights at the forefront. Now, we all know that the Ministry of Unification has channeled aid before, of course. In my personal opinion, that's not a bad thing. North Korea is an impoverished country, which requires of aid in many cases. That is my personal opinion. I insist. But the Ministry of Unification, in my opinion, as someone who's worked with them in many occasions, I think is pretty much more than that. It is an excellent channel of communication. It is a body that is great when it comes to gathering and analyzing data, for example, from such a secretive country. How is this stance, this new stance from Yoon Suk-yeol, going to affect ties by naming Kim? Well, personally, I think that going for more confrontational positions probably is not the best approach. That's, again, my personal opinion. But that said, it seems as years go by that it falls entirely, it's up entirely to Pyongyang to engage or not. Regardless of what Seoul tries to come up with, we've seen, at least for the past 10, 15 years, that it's up to the North to engage with the South. And since we don't really know, as I said, this is such a secretive country, we don't really know what the policy making looks like there. We can just hope that things will get better. But definitely, in my opinion, maybe not the best move.
Right, I see. And staying with this, Malene, what are your thoughts? Do you see this new stance as perhaps offering the two Koreas with a chance to engage in a different manner, or does it simply look to aggravate tensions on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, for my part, I think I agree with what have just been said, that I can't really see the more positive side of this change in like giving less aid to North Korea and taking this harder stand. I think it's a symbol that Yoon Suk-yeol is really trying to step back from the Moon Jae-in government policy, where Moon Jae-in was often being told as being a little bit too friendly towards North Korea. So I think this is a very clear statement from the Yoon Suk-yeol administration that they will now be taking a tough stand on North Korea. And it might also be the response to like the many very aggressive and very much confrontal moves that we have seen from North Korea in the past couple of months only. If we look at it last year, North Korea fired more missiles than ever recorded, and also now they have made a lot of comments towards South Korea and being very angry about this South Korean-American military cooperation. So this might be a way of for the Yoon Suk-yeol government to show that they are displeased with North Korea. But showing displeasement is, in my opinion, not the right way to go if we are trying to create better diplomatic ties between North and South Korea.
Right, and against this backdrop, Andres, there's been a bit of coverage about how Hyundai Group chairperson Hyun Jung-un had applied for and then withdrawn a visit call to North Korea's Mount Kumgang. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, exactly. On Saturday, the North Korean regime announced that they completely rejected any request by the Hyundai Group chairwoman Hyun Jung-un to visit North Korea. We should remind viewers that, of course, South Korean people trying to visit the North require permission from the government to do so. So basically, the Hyundai Group had actually just requested it to the Ministry of Unification, precisely. But even before the ministry finished reviewing this petition, this request, North Korea said it wasn't even going to contemplate reviewing it because it is still keeping its watertight enclosed borders policy that it activated in 2020 when the pandemic started, and that it's not going to let anyone in. And actually, so far, for the past 3 years, I believe the only person that we know that has actually gotten into North Korea is Chinese ambassador to North Korea, Wang Yajun, who actually presented credentials, I believe, in April. He's the only one who's been let in the country. Now, why would the Hyundai Group, and in this case, Chairwoman Hyun Jung-un, want to visit Mount Kumgang in North Korea? One might wonder. Well, her intention was to hold a ceremony to honor her late husband, Chung Mong-hun, who passed away in 2003, just like she did for the last time, I believe in 2018, when it was the 15th anniversary of his passing. Now, why does the Hyundai Group in this case have such a connection to a place like Mount Kumgang in North Korea? Well, Chung Mong-hun was the son of Chung Ju-young, who was the founder of the Hyundai Group, a very important, well-respected business person in South Korea, and a capital figure when it comes to both Koreas, to trying to get both Koreas to talk to each other. He was a person who actually gave a lot of aid to the North, as we remember, and the fact that he was actually born in what is now the Korean part of Gangwon province, where Mount Kumgang is located, actually got him the rights to operate facilities targeted for South Korean tourists, such as hotels, for example, in Mount Kumgang. These facilities were ultimately operated by Hyundai Asan, one of the subsidiaries, that was chaired by Chung Mong-hun. So that's basically the reason why there's such a close connection between this place, such a beautiful place, Mount Kumgang, and the Hyundai Group. Unfortunately, these tourist operations bringing South Korean people into Mount Kumgang were stopped in 2008 after a South Korean tourist was shot fatally by 2 North Korean soldiers, allegedly because she walked into some sort of military installation. And anyhow, I mean, it's basically North Korea throwing cold water again at the possibility of both North Korea maybe relaxing its border controls, or North Korea willing to have some sort of communication, at least with someone from the south.
Right, and staying with North Korea's actions, Malene, late last month, I believe, there were public rallies in Pyongyang condemning the U.S. The rallies were, of course, to mark the anniversary of the Korean War, and the rallies claimed that the U.S. was pushing the Korean Peninsula to the brink of a nuclear confrontation. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. According to state media, more than 120,000 people participated in this mass rally in Pyongyang, and they were wearing big signs with confrontational language, calling the United States the main disturber of peace, and that it was the United States that was like the main enemy against ensuring peace on the Korean Peninsula. And the mass rallies, they come at the same time as, they mark the 23rd year anniversary of the beginning of the Korean War. And they also come with at the same time that North Korea is publishing this new report about state security, claiming in this report in the very confrontational language that we know from North Korea, claiming that North Korea actually is the country ensuring and stabilizing peace and balance on the Korean Peninsula, and on the other hand, the United States is the main enemy and the main destroyer of peace on the Korean Peninsula. And at the same time, Seoul was also hosting a small anniversary ceremony, but it wasn't nearly as many people didn't come, and there weren't nearly as confrontational language used.
Right, and meanwhile, in response to the rallies over in Pyongyang, the U.S., Andres, I believe, flew nuclear-capable bombers to the peninsula. That being said, do you suppose such shows of strength by the U.S. will keep Pyongyang from further acts of provocation?
I think that's actually a very, very good question, and one that so many analysts are trying to answer these days. The U.S. did actually fly two B-52 nuclear-capable bombers last Friday over the Korean Peninsula, so that they joined joint military exercises with the Korean Air Force. This is something that we've been seeing a lot since last year, and it comes on the heels of also the recent deployment of the USS Michigan. It's an SSGN type submarine, which means it's nuclear propelled, and it actually packs Tomahawk guided missiles. So the deployment of all these assets, of course, responds to the so-called Washington Declaration, which U.S. President Joe Biden and Korean President Yoon signed last April. And let's just remind viewers maybe of the kind of landscape President Yoon was facing when he went to Washington, with increased calls in polls showing that, you know, more and more South Koreans were actually agreeing to the idea of maybe developing nuclear weapons, that South Korea should develop nuclear weapons to deter North Korea from all these weapons tests that we've seen since last year. Now, this is probably the best alternative that Washington and Seoul could have come with because, of course, developing nuclear weapons comes with important side effects, and very complex ones. And it's increasing what they call the extended deterrence, which is Washington deploying on a temporary and rotational basis strategic assets to the peninsula in order to deter, or so they want to believe, North Korea from testing more weapons. Now, when you ask experts if this, you know, kind of muscle flexing, you know, North Korea tests some weapons, and then the U.S. and South Korea stage some military drills. The U.S. brings some strategic assets like the B-52s or the B-1s or the B-2s, or they fly F-35s, which North Korea also hates. We know that. We know that they're scared of them, but we also know that that makes them angry. So experts, I think, in the end, are trying to figure out who's the first, both actors, who's the first one who's going to start maybe, you know, toning it down a bit. And then we'll see maybe a gradual de-escalation. I have to say that North Korea, for the past 2 months, as Malene just mentioned, hasn't tested those many weapons, especially compared to last year when we saw just record number of missile tests. So I'm hoping that maybe in the next few weeks, maybe in the next couple of months, we'll see how it goes, but maybe this could be the start of some sort of de-escalation. Maybe we won't see the deployment of as many U.S. strategic assets in the peninsula. Maybe, who knows?
Hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed for less tensions. And beyond inter-Korean ties, Malene, Seoul hosted its annual Queer Culture Festival this past Saturday. There was also a bit of talk about the location of the event this year. Tell us about that.
Yes, so since 2015, if you don't look at the COVID-restricted years, each year the Seoul Culture Festival has been staged outside of City Hall. However, this was not the case this year, as the spot had been taken by a Christian youth concert. And for those of us who live in Korea, we are all well aware that there are many Christian groups that are opposed to the Pride, the Queer Festival, because of it involving homosexuality and queerness, which some of these very old-fashioned Christian groups are against. So there was this concert at City Hall, meaning that the parade had to be moved outside, a little bit away from the City Hall, and marching through the city. And very opposed to what I have been reading in mainly Korean media, which has been claiming that this was a degradation of the festival. Actually, I was there during the parade and interviewing some of the people present, and some people were actually saying that they preferred being a little bit more outdoor, because the festival usually being held at the City Hall is in this kind of box, which can make it very difficult to go in and out. And usually the Christian groups are gathering around the box, shouting slogans and spreading hate towards homosexuality, towards the queer environment. But meaning that they were placed outside of the box actually gave them more air. It was easier to access the pride. It was easier to begin the march. It was not the same feeling of being a crowd, too many people, and like a too little space.
Right, or being enclosed in a very small space then. Malene, a Gallup poll here in the country shows that 4 out of around 10 South Koreans are in support of legalizing same-sex marriage. That being said, how does that particular finding compare to findings perhaps in Europe?
Well, I think in many places in Europe, we don't have these kind of surveys so often anymore. And the reason is that the majority of people just naturally support same-sex marriage. As we can also see, almost all, I think it's 24 out of 27 EU countries have already legalized same-sex marriage. And this started happening like 20 years ago. So during the 2000s and the 2010s, most countries in EU actually already legalized marriage, same-sex marriage, that is. So now most homosexual couples can get married in churches or wherever they please. And I think there is, in general, a very big support from the different communities in the different countries to this specific thing. I know for a fact that in Denmark we have a very big support of homosexual rights, of queerness. We're also very known for our Copenhagen Pride that we host every year, where we have participants from all over Europe. Some people even travel from Asia, from America, to come and participate in this parade. So I think in general, most European countries are in favor of same-sex marriage.
Right. Well, compared to the advances made in Europe, Korea is only taking baby steps, Andres. But how do you explain the nonetheless subtle but tangible public support of LGBTQ community here in the country, especially among the young here?
Yes, actually, I've been covering the Seoul Queer Culture Festival every year since I came to Korea, and I can actually say that the support seems to be growing, and especially among young people. This meaning that I see younger and younger people actually attending not only the parade, but the festival itself. And I think it's actually just natural, both in Korea and basically any country in the world, I believe, younger generations are just more open-minded than their seniors. That's just life, right? In Korea in particular, we can probably say that there may be a larger gap between younger people and their parents and grandparents. On one side, because Korea looked really different 20, 30 years ago. I actually can't think of any country in the world where, you know, if you grab someone, a Korean person in the 90s and put him in a time machine and take him to 2023, he really wouldn't recognize this country. This country has gone through such phenomenal change. And that plays a part. And the other, I think, element that is important is the fact that, you know, internet and the use of the internet have grown 200 million-fold compared to the early 2000s or the late 90s. And of course, the strongest users are younger people who, you know, get exposed through the internet, through different lifestyles, different values, different realities, and of course, they become more open to anything related, for example, to the LGBTQ movement. So eventually, I think Korea, like almost every country in the world, will eventually allow same-sex marriage. It's just a matter of time, I think.
Right, and hopefully you're right then. Malene, finally then, Korea's record low fertility rate, that is, has made international headlines yet again. Could you tell us a bit more about that particular coverage? There was quite a bit of alarm about the rapid fall in fertility rate for the country.
Yes. So as most Koreans already are aware of, the fertility rate in Korea is very low. Actually, it is the lowest in the world. It's the only country in the world that has a fertility rate on less than 1. It is 0.78 in Korea right now. So the news is that the Korean fertility rate has dropped dramatically compared to other countries in the 60s. In 1960, the fertility rate in Korea was almost 6. So we dropped from 6 to 0.78, which is a very, very big fall if you compare it to other countries. For example, if we compare it to Japan, in 1960, the Japanese fertility rate was 2. Now it is 1.3. In the United States, it was 3.5 in the 60s, and now it is 1.6. So it's the fall that Korea has made both show the crazy progress that we have also been talking about today between that Korea went from being a very poor country and not so developed country until we see now that Korea is one of the most developed countries in the world, and the economy is doing quite well compared to especially other countries in the region. So this fall is actually the biggest fall that has been recorded in world history of fertility rate. So that being said, right now we have a situation in the world where most developed countries are struggling with their fertility rate. So you can say that this is also another proof that Korea has really gone up in the same league as we see in many European countries, as we see in Japan, in the US. However, it just seems to be a bit more extreme in Korea right now.
Right, and hopefully policies are in place to better tackle the low fertility rate here in the country then. All right, Malene, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
And Andres, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you so much, as always.
Right, well, that ends Tuesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. We'll be back same time tomorrow, that is Wednesday, so do join us then. Thank you for now.